I've seen something I've come to know as a red cap, or a blood cap. It's supposedly a kind of pagan fairy, spirit, or demon. When I first saw it, I thought it was a person, and then when I realized something was off about it, I thought it was a ghost. I'll tell you about it first, and then explain how I came to know more about it. I first started seeing it relatively recently, during the summer of 2016. A friend of mine had been renting his house from his parents, who were terrible landlords, by the way. It was a partially completed, extravagant brick house at the back end of a field in the woods, with the completed portion being attached to a trailer house. Myself and several other friends of ours, accumulating a group total of about 10 regulars, were enjoying our summer vacation from university and working. And when we had time off, we were all chilling at his place, watching movies, smoking weed, working out, drinking, etc. We'd thrown several huge blowout parties over the spring and early summer months, with over 300 plus people showing up to them each as well. At one of these parties, a huge brawl had broken out over some drunken disagreement, flared by the reality that rivaling town students were at the party, and some rednecks who had shown up from Kellyville had fired off some guns. In the panic after the gunshots, one dipshit ran over the water line with his vehicle and broke it pretty badly. So we had to bring water jugs and make do as a group until the water got repaired, which took a while because college kids are broke. So we'd have to go outside to the wood's edge to take a piss. While I was out there, I saw it. It would be dressed differently from time to time, but it was always one of two outfits. It would either be dressed in dirty overalls with a dirty shirt underneath, or it would be in a really old black tuxedo with a really bad black toupee on. It looked like a white man with a huge nose and large eyes. It would be standing in the field staring at the house, and if you looked away and then looked back again, it would be standing in a different place in the field, still staring at the house, and standing just a little bit closer. It was never looking at you, though. It was like being at someone's house and seeing a person who lives there on the property, like it just belonged. And it always showed itself sometime in between sunset and sunrise, during the twilight hours. I didn't mention seeing it at first. It was actually a girl who hung out with the group that came inside and asked about the man in the field. At that point, I got excited because someone else had seen it too, and I asked if it was wearing what I had described to you earlier, at which point the friend who owned the house yelled, "Yes, you've both seen it too?" Over the next couple of months, 7 more people saw it, without any of us telling him about it first. We were high or drunk when we'd see him usually. Not that weed or alcohol cause hallucinations like that, but they could lower our inhibitions enough to see something. Over these same months, people at the house would say they felt like they were being watched from corners and doorways, and several things would move around the house when no one was there. Like a set of praying hands above the fireplace mantel being found on the kitchen stove, with the palms facing away from you, and the cabinets in the kitchen would open on their own. Anyways, when he finally got fed up with what terrible landlords his parents were, $900 a month rent per person, no matter if it was just him or however many roommates he brought in, he decided to move out, and I said I'd help. Now keep in mind, this night we were 100% sober. We were gathering his stuff to help him get moved into a different place, and had almost everything gathered, except this lotto ticket he'd won some money on. So the 2 of us were up there alone, tearing the house apart looking for this lotto ticket. It had just been on the bar counter and it disappeared. During the search, I looked in a nearby room, and as soon as I walked in, I saw it, standing right outside the window, looking into the house. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't take my eyes off it. After a moment, I called for my friend to come, and just pointed at the window when he walked in, and he saw it too. We kept our eyes on it while talking over how to react, and decided to just find the damn ticket and leave. Since it had never been aggressive and we were going to be coming back anyways, we went into the main area and continued our search. Eventually, getting tired of looking, I stopped and leaned over the bar while looking at my phone, when I got a weird feeling coming from the doorway of his parents' old bedroom across the living room. As I turned, my friend walked in and stopped and looked into the room with me. We both felt it, and there it was, standing in the room, behind the TV and the TV stand, a couple feet taller than it looked before, dressed in that tuxedo and toupee. Its big eyes were jet black and looking right at us, and for the first time it didn't feel like it was okay. It felt aggressive. After a few moments of staring back at it in silence, my friend ran over and shut the door, and then said we were leaving. I had already turned around to grab a bag and was in the hallway. Right behind me on the floor was the lotto ticket we'd been searching all over the house for. I grabbed it, and on the way out I looked up at the fireplace mantel, and the praying hands had been turned, with their palms facing out towards us. We haven't been back to the house since. A few months later, we were hanging out at our dealer's house. He's an old school hippie, and he's deep into pagan beliefs. We were talking about ghost stories over a bowl of weed with him and another guy. After describing it to them, they looked at each other and told us it was a blood cap, a demon that claims land and then drains the energy off of it, that they get their names from the practice of dyeing the wigs or toupees they wear with human blood, and that ours was probably a young one if its hair was black. Then the dealer, sensing our skepticism, told us to hold on a minute, and he left the room. Then he brought back a book full of descriptions and artist renderings of spirits, loas, demons, fairies, and monsters from pagan beliefs. And then he showed us an artist rendering that looked just like what we had seen, right down to the big nose and the huge eyes. This happened when I was 10. There was 5 or 6 of us spending the night at my friend C's house. Her parents own a ranch in the hill country region of Texas, and their home was built on top of a hill. Other than the dirt driveway up to the house, the hill was wild land covered in cedar trees. It was a clear, slightly chilly night in maybe October or November. After the sun went down, the moon was out, so we stayed outside playing hide and seek, using the driveway as a base. Their ranch was far out of town and well fenced, so her parents didn't have a problem with it. Anyway, during one round of hide and seek, my friend G and I were the last 2 hidden, and we were so good at hiding and avoiding the seeker that the seeker found everyone else and enlisted them to help find us. Or so we thought. We had almost made it back to the road when 3 of the girls unknowingly cut us off. We ducked down behind a ridge of dirt to remain concealed. G chucked a rock across the road behind them to divert their attention. We were waiting for them to get far enough off the road to make a dramatic rush for the safety of base, when I heard what sounded like a rock getting dislodged and sliding down the hill behind us. I thought G might have done it, so I didn't say anything, but she kind of looked at me and asked if I was okay. I was about to reply when I heard what sounded like C, the one whose house we were staying at, calling from way down the hill behind us. "Help me!" We bolted straight up and yelled for the others. They came running back to the road, and we told them what we had heard. No one had seen C since we had started that round of hide and seek. We took them to the spot where we were hiding and called out C's name. For a moment, all was quiet. Then, faintly, even farther down the hill, we hear her say, "Help, I'm stuck." We panicked and ran up the driveway as fast as we could to get her parents. When we burst through the kitchen door, ready to yell for her mom and dad, C was sitting at the bar eating a popsicle. "I wondered how long it was going to take y'all to find me," she gloated. Her parents heard us freaking out downstairs and came down to see what was going on. We told them what happened, and her dad grabbed his shotgun, got in his truck, and went to drive around the ranch, making sure there wasn't anyone on the property who wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't find anything. I've always wondered what we heard that night. We didn't talk about it much, but I know it remained in all of our minds every time we stayed over there past sundown. Does anyone know what it might have been? A few years ago, I moved into an apartment with my partner, and I thought this was the perfect place. There was so much to like about the apartment. Unfortunately, not long after moving in, the demographic of the building began to shift. The building consisted of working-class couples, young families, and some elderly, but after a few months, more seedy characters began moving in. My partner and I worked opposite shifts, so I found myself alone a lot and afraid of the new individuals moving in. I've witnessed so many things that have scared me and put me on edge, but those are stories for another time. This led me to isolate myself from the building and avoid as many people as possible. I only knew my landlord and her family. Skip forward a few months, I receive a knock at my door. My apartment is easily accessible by the front of the building, so I find we get a lot of traffic, confused patrons, drunkards, and the like. I looked through the peephole and saw the delivery man. Even though I hadn't ordered a package, I opened the door. He informs me that my neighbor has a package, but he is not answering. He asks if I can sign for it and give it to him. I've had to deal with this delivery company before, and if you miss the drop-off, they send it to their head office over an hour away, and they only keep it for a few days before they return to sender. Having been through that, I decide to sign for the package. I knock on my neighbor's door, and nothing. I leave a note identifying myself and that I have a package for him. Later that night, he knocks on my door. He looks like a nice older man in his 60s, with messy white hair and a kind smile. He thanks me for my kindness and we chat. I learn that he has been in the building for over 20 years and has seen its many phases. As the weeks go on, I see him occasionally and always exchange pleasantries. He doesn't speak to too many people either, but he always makes an effort to be pleasant to me. For a few weeks, I don't see him or hear from him. I know he is a bit of a hermit and also a hoarder. I saw into his apartment once and it was stacked floor to ceiling, so it doesn't seem unusual, but I always keep an eye out just in case. One day, I get a knock on my door while I'm home alone. I don't answer, but I listen through the door as a man on the phone starts speaking loudly to my landlord about paperwork and collecting valuables. I continue to listen as my landlord meets him and walks to the nice gentleman's apartment. I come to find out that he's passed away very suddenly of pancreatic cancer, and no one had really noticed but me. I'm not entirely sure if he died in the apartment or if they found him first and he died in the hospital. The point is, no one knew he was sick. He didn't have many friends or family left, so it's just his brother that came to deal with his estate. Due to the fact that he was a hoarder, it would take a long time to clear out the apartment and renovate it for the next tenants. This begins the slow process of sorting through his stuff. Whenever the door was open, you could just see piles and piles of crap. He literally had a small path that he would use. As people walk by the open apartment, they comment but can't remember who was there. Literally no one missed him in our building, and it made me so sad. This is when I began to see black shadows in my hallways, and my cat started staring in corners or hissing with no explanation. I've had cats all my life, and I am aware of their behaviors, but this was different. It all began with staring, and then advanced to hissing, spitting, and hunching their backs at these random spots. It happened all around my apartment. I used to have my computer in a spare bedroom, kind of like a guest room and office. Due to our building being heated by radiators, we only had so many places to put the computer. It was placed along the long wall, so while I was sitting there, I'd be parallel with the hallway. I began to get very uncomfortable in my own home, more so than usual. The building was always at a stifling temperature, but I would get very cold and experience cold spots. My cats would hide, and they rarely chilled with me anymore. This is when I started noticing the shadows in the hallway. They were darker than the dark, and they would dart by while I was working on the computer. Now, could it have been a trick of the light? Maybe. Could it have been my eyes adjusting to the computer in the dark? Possibly. Was it lights from passing cars? Probably not, because my blinds were always closed, and they were blackout curtains. Was it my cats? No. It was about 5.5 feet tall, based on where I would see it against the wall in relation to my things. It was only ever one shadow, and I felt like it would peer at me from behind the door frame. It would watch me. I would get chills down my spine. When I would look straight at it, it would be gone, and as I would turn my attention back to the computer, it would dart past. The feeling in the office began to change. It felt oppressive, and I couldn't stand being in there, so my boyfriend moved the computer to the living room to help me feel more comfortable. The cleanup crews continued to work, and I would hear them or see them pass with things from the apartment. That was when it hit me. The activity only started after they began cleaning it out. Plus, he was a shorter man, about the size of the shadows I had been seeing. To test out my theory, I talked about the old man and the development of his apartment to my boyfriend before he left for work. When I was home alone, I noticed the shadow man came back. He waited until the night, and I saw him hiding in the hallway, but he didn't enter the living room. He blended back into the darkness. I became obsessed, and I would see the shadow all the time. I would create a force field of light in the living room, but if there was any dark rooms or hallways, the shadow would be there. I became so upset that I would demand all the lights be on all the time. I'm ashamed to admit that I even had to sleep with a night light. Even though I suspected it was the nice old man, I was still scared. Seeing something move in the dark when nothing should be there was unnerving. It was hard because my boyfriend never saw it. I could tell that he didn't believe me, but he wanted to. He wanted to see it. I wanted him to see it too. The only experience he ever told me about, he woke up at 3 a.m. to go to the bathroom and noticed the light in our kitchen flickering. At first, it didn't bother him because it's an old building, but he went to the kitchen to check it out. We always leave it on because we both have a tendency to wake up and go to the washroom in the middle of the night. The weird thing was that the light switch was off. He flicked it on and there was no change. He stood right under the light and it continued to flicker. Remembering my experiences, he asked if someone was there, and the light turned off. A little freaked out, he hurried back to bed. That was the last thing that happened in relation to our neighbor. About a week later, the place was finished, and by the end of the month, someone moved in. It's been about a year since this all happened, and I still think about it every now and then. I like to think our neighbor was watching over his estate, and he stayed with us because he trusted us. At night, I will look into the darkness and wonder if he is still there, but I think he has moved on. I hope he has. I recently met my great-uncle Charles for the first time in my life. We were at a family reunion in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. There must have been about 40 to 50 people that showed up to my aunt's house, where the gathering was held. I was extremely bored and my dad dragged me to this. It was mostly people 50 and over, so the conversations were rather dull. Jimmy works here and Tommy has 3 kids, or Billy did this. Old people bragging, basically. I was watching the clock, waiting for this to get the fuck over, when I noticed an old man, probably 75 years old at least, just sitting in the corner in an old recliner. No one was talking to him, and the more I watched, the more I noticed they were all avoiding him like the plague. I nudged my father. "Hey Dad, who's that?" "That's your great-uncle Charles. He killed an old lady, but he got out of going to prison for being completely insane." My father shook his head. I thought for a minute, and decided what the hell. Sounds like the most interesting person to talk to, right? I made up my mind and walked over to him, and greeted him with my hand out. "Hey Uncle Charles, how are you? I'm your nephew, Kevin." I tried to be cheery. He didn't look up at me or anything, just kept staring ahead. I didn't even think he was breathing until finally I saw his chest inhale very slightly. I thought I'd just come over and introduce myself, so you have a good day, Uncle Charles." I got maybe 2 steps when I finally heard him speak.
"Boy, come here,"
he said, with a deep, rumbling voice. I turned back and noticed he was finally looking at me. He definitely looked tired and very old. He's seen better days, that's for sure. "Hey, I just wanted to talk to you about something if that's okay." I still tried to keep my cheery attitude.
"About Edna, right?"
He had so much sorrow in his eyes, I actually felt bad for him. Not sure who Edna is, but I was wondering about something that happened back in 72.
"Yes, Edna. I've told this story many times. No one believes me, though. It is becoming pointless to explain myself."
I would like to hear about it. I'm not as judgmental as everyone else. He took a sip of his water. This is where I'm going to start telling the story in the words of my uncle. I'll let you decide if you think he's crazy or if this really happened to him. This was a long time ago, 45 years or so back, when we didn't have all this technology stuff you kids have to video record everything. I had no way of proving I was telling the truth, but I was and am. I was seeing this beautiful girl named Edna. She was tall, slim, had beautiful red hair, and was every bit as kind as she was beautiful. I finally worked up the nerve to ask her out after talking to her for a month or so, and to my surprise, she said yes. We quickly fell in love and began spending every minute we could with each other. Life was wonderful, and it seemed as if I found the woman I was going to spend the rest of my life with. That is, until she started sleepwalking. The first incident was just weird, but it didn't frighten me at all. I just calmly walked her back to bed, and that was it. After the first few times, things started to just get creepy, and I knew something was wrong. The last night scared me to death. It was a night I'll never forget. This was around 3 in the morning. I woke up to Edna breathing very heavily into the back of my neck. At first I thought she was just in a deep sleep and trying to cuddle up to me. I tried to scoot a little further away, but whenever I moved, so did she.
Edna, could you please give me some room, please?
I groggily asked. As soon as I spoke, she reacted, and it wasn't in a good way. Her breathing increased to rapid, short pants, and it had a bit of wheeze to it. I rolled over and I nearly shit my pants with what I was met with. Edna's eyes were as wide open as any human could open them, maybe even wider than they should have been able to open. She also was smiling wildly, like she was actually in pain from how far the corners of her lips were being stretched.
Jesus Christ!
I hollered and jumped back, falling off the bed. I sat there stunned, I was not expecting that at all. As I sat there, with my heart beating out of my chest, I started to hear the bed slightly creak. She was slowly scooting to the edge. Slowly, her head poked over the edge of the bed. God, did she look terrifying. She looked pure evil, and I just knew deep down, this was not Edna.
Ed?
I whimpered, looking for her to maybe laugh like she was joking. Her response sent chills down my spine. She slowly shook her head no, and started to open her mouth. I swear I could hear her skin stretching as she opened her mouth wider and wider. I knew something was terribly wrong.
Fuck!
I shouted and jumped up, running out of that room. I was so afraid I was tripping and stumbling over everything as I tried to get away. I could hear her getting off the bed. I ran into the bedroom at the end of the hall and closed the door as quietly as I could. This was the room where I kept my guns, and I quickly grabbed the nearest rifle. I think it was a lever-action .30-30. I always kept my bullets in the closet, so I quickly loaded the gun. I know it sounds crazy to prepare to shoot the love of my life, but I'm telling you now, this was not her. Once I was in the closet, I slowly closed the door and peered out those little blind slits. It was pitch black. I couldn't hear her footsteps at first, only the sound of my own heart racing.
Charles!
The voice made my skin crawl. It was a whole different voice than Edna's. It sounded like a distorted child's voice, but it was in a very low tone. Then I heard her giggle. At this point, I was in tears. What in the fuck was in my dear Edna? I heard a creak. My heart raced as I knew that one squeaky board in the house. She was getting closer. I held my rifle tightly and prayed to God. I prayed that he cast out whatever was in my Edna, and that she would be free from this demon.
God can't help her, Charles. Or you,
she said. I could hear her getting closer as her feet shuffled quietly through the dark house. Then the door to the room creaked open. I watched in complete horror as only her face poked around the corner. My eyes adjusted to the dark by then. That huge smile plastered across her face. I didn't think there was any way she could see me. Then, by the grace of God, she slowly backed out of the room, and I could hear her feet quietly going down the stairs. Once I was sure that she was downstairs, I let out a sigh of relief. and then I heard her racing back up those fucking stairs. The sudden noise startled me, and I let out a yelp.
Charles?
She shouted in that distorted voice. I opened the closet door, aiming my gun, waiting. Once she got up the stairs, all of the noise stopped. She was just standing there, outside the door. Then out came her smiling face. She stared at me for a minute.
I found you, Charles.
She stepped inside, and my God, did she look horrifying. Her hair a ratted mess, veins sticking out of her neck and forehead, and her arms were so tense.
Edna, I'm going to warn you once. Stop,
I shouted. That was all it took. She came barreling full speed at me while laughing hysterically. I gently squeezed the trigger, and the sound was deafening. My ears rang and my eyes burned from the flash. Once I could see clearly again, I jumped back and shouted. She was standing face to face with me, a hole in her chest. She just smiled and stood there. After what seemed like an eternity, her facial expression changed, and she was back to my Edna. Then she collapsed. I knew she was dead. Blood covered the floor as she lay lifeless. I called 911 and told them I just killed my wife. Police showed up and arrested me, and I must have told my story of what happened at least 100 times. No one believed me. They just thought I was crazy. After 10 years in a mental facility, they let me go, and now I live my life in my room, talking to no one. No one wants to talk to me anyway. They think I'm either a murderer or a psycho. This has ruined my life, and I pay the consequences every day. At this point, he was done with his story and sat like a stone. I couldn't believe what he had just told me. Was he telling the truth? Did he take drugs or something? All I know is, I hope to God I'm never put in that situation. I probably would have shot too. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. Come follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Corey Rhino. I actually want to thank someone from Instagram, because she's been really good to me for a long time, even when I'm not uploading. So thank you, Bella Marley 420. You're awesome. So I guess it's time for the skit, which has something to do with daytime television. But before that, as always, be good to animals, even people. Sit. Okay, we're back. We're here with Jessica and Steve.
Boo!
And it's time to find out the answer to that burning question. The DNA results are in, and they're in my hand. Steve, Jessica, when it comes to 2-year-old Heather, Jessica, you are not the mother.
Scout, Snamot, Barksbus, Herish. Boo! The show sucks!